So our next speaker is Duane and Luis Brotons from the Forest Science and Technology Center of Catalonia, CREAF, and they are going to talk about global change and fire regimes in Mediterranean ecosystems. Whenever you want.
Hello, thanks first Fundación Universitat for inviting us to this very interesting day of exchange in knowledge and experiences. We're going to explain a bit what our, very briefly first, what our lab is doing or trying to do, have done in the last years. We are a joint research center between the CREAF and the Forest Science Center of Catalonia. We're located in Solsona, in the inland of Catalonia. Our group, it's the Biodiversity and Landscape Ecology lab, so it focuses mostly on understanding the dynamics of biodiversity and ecosystems and how different drivers of global change are affecting those dynamics. We come more from an ecology point of view, so we've been working a lot on understanding responses of biodiversity, especially vertebrates and birds, to different drivers of change, and we have been focusing on the Mediterranean, so I've been using fire as a model for many of our studies at the landscape scale to understand how heterogeneity in space and changes in heterogeneity in space are affecting community dynamics. We're using a spatial approach always, so we're trying to integrate and develop different methods to understand those changes and link those changes to the different drivers and the interaction between those drivers. What happened is our scale of interest, the landscape, and the understanding of those linkages between biodiversity and fire dynamics made us to focus on the projections of those changes in the future. And in biodiversity, we have had a lot of experience of climate change projections, but we found that actually we had very few examples of tools where we could project fire regimes at the in a spatially explicit way. So we could actually derive models or have these tools where you could have land use or forest kind of information that we could relate to our community data. So we became actually quite interested in that line of development that actually is the one we're going to concentrate on. Andrea is gonna explain a bit more about that. So actually fire has been one of the main disturbances we have been assessing, and actually we have been trying in the last years to develop this line that actually became alive by itself, in which we developed landscape models accounting for the interactions between vegetation, climate, fire suppression, all these different interactions that actually are one of the challenges that I think we our group puts on the table, for which so many uncertainties are arising. So we are starting to, our group is actually trying to focus on the interaction, on this integration of these different drivers from land use change to climate change and on disturbance regimes, and assessing those impacts on biodiversity. So with these tools that we have been developing, Andrea will explain a bit more what have been our main studies more related on fire regime changes.
Yeah. So this works this way? Okay. So I will now explain a little bit what all this has resulted in, and we mainly have provided new evidence on the role of fire suppression, climate change, forests, landscape characteristics in fire regimes, mostly here in Catalonia. And all this has served to understand and quantify the impact of different management practices. For instance, in the right, you have an agricultural conversion management scenario in a simulation tool, and these are the results from 2010 to 2050. And in the y-axis, you have effectiveness, which is the ratio between fire suppression and the target fire area. And in the x-axis, you have the amount of agricultural lands to be converted. And you have in the two panels aggregated plants, new patches. On the right panel, you have scattered new patches, and in three different allocations strategies. So from here, we can quantify the effects on fire effectiveness according to the different scenarios. And we can see that, for instance, in scattered scenarios, we have more difference between the allocations than in aggregated scenarios. And here's also another example. This is with prescribed burning. In the top panels, you can see the evolution from nowadays to 2100 for total burnt area and burnt area in high-intensity fires. The purple line is business as usual scenario, and the other lines are climate change and other management scenarios. And you can see in the right that most of the prescribed burning scenarios decrease the amount of high-intensity fires. The bottom panels are the total amount burned. And you can see as well, no? Oh, okay. There's a decrease in the amount, or even it's the total amount burned is similar, there's a decrease in amount of the high-intensity fires. So with all these, we've seen that global change is actually modifying fire regimes in Catalonia towards a critical situation, and we need strategic management plans and a lot of landscape planning. And fire management needs to shift from fire suppression to fire regime management era. And these are the main challenges that we have listed. We have split it in two main groups, which are knowledge challenges and management challenges. In knowledge, we believe there's a scale mismatch. We are not accounting for processes that are governing fire activity at large scales. We are mainly focused on what's happening at fine scales. There are also non-stationary processes that make it difficult to predict the outside historical range of variability. And that's what actually we've seen here, that we are seeing more and more new events that we cannot predict, that we don't have data from the past, and how we can model all these. And there's also paucity of empirical data, especially for long term. In Catalonia, we don't have fire perimeters before the 50s, and also we don't have specific data on fire suppression. And in terms of management, we think that decision making should target more to the future. And trying to, okay, we are out of time. Okay, sorry. Okay. Going to fire regime management area. And also we believe that we could be more focused on a multi-objective management. For instance, if we say that we should manage our landscape, a good question could be, which is the minimum proportion of landscape to be managed to reduce wildfire risk, and link it to biodiversity conservation objectives. And also do all these with dynamic landscapes and affected with climate change. And also, we think that an important challenge is how to implement fire risk reduction planning policies, overcoming all the diversity of laws, because we see there's a lot of hindrances when we want to implement fire reduction management. For instance, urbanizations, private ownership, etc. And our offers from our group is to provide quantitative assessments of fire regime drivers and effectiveness of management at the landscape scale and fire regime scale, and evaluation of climate change effects, taking into account vegetation changes. Our expectations are working with climate experts, which we think that it's very important to understand the future evolution of climate, clarifying fundamental objectives, working with decision makers, and biodiversity, for instance, and also society concerns. And also we think that it could be interesting to have a more specific fire prevention legislation. And that's it.